show.
Hello, I'm Laura Walker. I'm the president and CEO of New York Public Radio. Thank you all for coming tonight. We are thrilled to have you, and I'm so glad to have you here to join us for a live taping of WNYC Studios' Here's the Thing with Alec Baldwin. And how many people saw him this weekend? Whoa! I think he killed it as Donald Trump. He was the full package. He made us laugh so hard, we cried. One website said his impersonation was, quote, so good you'd think Alex spent more time preparing for the role than Trump did for the debate. Is that true? It probably is. Saturday Night Live, ironically, is also actually where Alec made his affection for public radio known to the world as Pete Schweddy. How many people remember Pete Schweddy, the Schweddy balls? This was, of course, a recurring skit where Alec, or Pete rather, would appear in this kind of fictitious NPR show called The Delicious Dish, and in kind of very public radio dulcet tones, he would talk a lot about his balls. Well, he got our attention with that, and we have been part of his world ever since. And Alec was great. He came and spoke at our gala one year, and after the gala we talked about like doing something, and we are so thrilled that we together have created Here's the Thing with Alec Baldwin, which is a really popular podcast. If you haven't heard it, they are some of the very, very best interviews that you can hear. I can just remember the David Letterman interview and so many more, and you are going to have a real treat tonight to hear another one of those great interviews. So we all get to go along with the ride. The conversation is going to be so good that you don't want to miss anything, and you want our listeners to hear all of it. So please turn off your phones so there are no bells or chimes during the show. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Alec Baldwin.
How are you? I've done a couple of these live interviews, and this is someone who, in this business, somebody who I've admired for so many years as an actor who has appeared in so many great films and rich films and diverse films, and worked with so many incredible directors, and has so many indelible images from the Coen brothers and Woody Allen and Scorsese and, of course, Spike Lee. There's so many roles, and we won't have time to touch on enough of them tonight, but someone who's produced and written and directed his own films. I think he was mentioning to me backstage that he just finished doing his 7th film that was his own project, and worked in the theater. And for anybody who is like me, who is always desperate, and that is the word desperate, to find my next binge viewing source on TV, the night of program on HBO. I remember writing to him and to Steve Zalian, the producer and director and creator, and to Richard Price. I was like, how are you going to wrap this up in the final episode? It was just like the most incredibly nuggety thing that was happening in that show, and I love that show, the night of. And I hope they do more of it. But again, I love doing this program because I get to pick people that I want to talk to. We did this live in Red Bank, New Jersey. We went down there and did Kevin Kline at the Two River Theater there, somebody who I also love and have admired him from day one in this business. And I'm very grateful to our guest this evening for agreeing to do this. I don't think he does a lot of this stuff. I don't think he has the spare time. Please join me in welcoming our very special guest, John Turturro. Now, all of the things we're going to talk about, he and I, unfortunately, already covered backstage. We try to avoid that. we try to avoid getting too cozy backstage, but I remember we were talking about, and I was just briefly touching on what it's like for you to produce and write and direct your own films, because you've had this incredible career as a film actor, and you've made so many great films that are other people's projects, and you're an actor for hire. But when you do your own thing, describe to me, for example, the one you just finished.
I just finished a film called Going Places. It's a adaptation or reimagining of a French film called Les Valseuses, which is from the, it's probably not the correct pronunciation, from the 70s, and it was also a book by Bertrand Blier, and it's the film that made...
This is a radio show, by the way, so say it again better,
okay.
And we'll cut it into the show later on. Les Valseuses.
Les Valseuses. It means the waltzers or the testicles. It was a film that made Gérard Depardieu a star, actually, and it's a really transgressive sort of. It's considered kind of a classic in France. Pauline Kael was a big champion of the film, and it was a film that kind of blew my mind when I was a kid. And I was rewatching it, and I wrote to Blier, and I asked him, I said, "Would you ever think that someone could make an American version of it?" And he said, "Yeah, I've seen your films, and you're crazy enough, and here's the rights." So anyway, it took me a long time to do that, and to adapt it and get the money to do it, and that's why my hair is this way. And I actually, during the course of it, was doing readings of it, and I was kind of unhappy with what I was doing. And then I thought of, well, there's a character that I've done in a play, and I think and also in a movie, and it would kind of maybe work. And I tried it, and it did. And so I'm going to reprise. I have reprised the character of Jesus Quintana. So he's going to be in this film. He is in the film. So I took this French movie and a character that I had created at the Public Theater, and then in another movie, and I kind of pushed them all together, and it kind of worked out, at least in my mind, and I was able to cobble the film, the money together.
It's interesting how someone said that once about Bertolucci in Last Tango, how he picked two actors, and he identified an actor and an actress, and he went into their filmography to figure out who, through a character they had played, that character would have grown to become the character in my film.
Right. No, it's a truth. Sometimes you want to revisit somebody years later.
Right.
And
Massimo Girotti, who played Brando's wife's lover.
Yeah.
And Maria Micchi, who played her mother. And Bertolucci said, well, these people played other characters in other films that would have grown and become the characters in my film.
Yeah, so it's nice to kind of continue that. But I you have to be kind of a little crazy to attempt to do one of these things. I started out, the first movie I made, Mac, that was a play, and it took me, I worked on it for like 10 years, and it was my first movie. And after I did that, many people asked me to direct other movies, but I kind of knew that I wasn't really a director for hire. And I did
Why?
that film. Well, because I did that film because I understood that world. I grew up in it. My father was a builder, and there were no films ever made about builders. It's always about, gangsters or criminals or lawyers, but you never see a film about, bricklayers or builders or bridge builders. And I wanted to make a film about that because it's a very challenging and dramatic business. It can be a very dangerous business also.
And when you were a child,
Right.
your father was in construction?
My father was a builder.
He was a builder.
Yeah, he was a builder.
And your mother was a housewife, or she had a career?
My mother was a person. She was a musician, and then she kind of gave it up. Her brothers were professional musicians, but she wanted to be like a designer. But she was a very talented person, probably the most talented person in our family. But she didn't really get a chance to do all of that. But she certainly made sure that we had that opportunity.
How many kids in your family, you and your brother?
3 boys.
3 boys.
I'm the middle child.
And what did your family think about when you wanted to go to New Paltz and then Yale Drama School? And
my father wanted me to have a backup plan. He wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor, and I was pretty good in school.
Or get your union card and learn how to...
He didn't want me to be a carpenter. He wanted me to be an architect. He thought, but I wasn't really good enough in math to do that. But he wanted me to be a professional, man. Like a lot of immigrant. My father wasn't born here. He was born in Italy, and he came here in 1931. And then he wound up being, in the service. He was in World War II. He was in invasion of D-Day. And, so he was a real kind of American guy. He wanted me to reap all those rewards.
So when you are a child, I mean, because you and I are roughly the same age, when you were young, what was film and theater in your life as a child? Was your house
It was
steeped in that?
A lot of music and I guess film. I mean, we would go to the movies all the time, but obviously, probably like you, we watched $1 Million Movie. You know what I mean? And The Honeymooners and all those classic things that really influenced us. And I think a lot of those Warner Brothers films, because they would always be on over and over again with Edward G. and Robinson and James Cagney and Burt Lancaster.
Did you have a favorite?
Oh, I loved
them all.
I loved so many of them, and one time I would want to be Burt Lancaster, and then I would want to be James Cagney, and then I still love those actors, and I love those actors because, they're really physical, and you really see their whole performance, and they're still, Barbara Stanwyck, just crazy about them, and I have remained so.
I remember when I was a kid, my favorite death scene was in City for Conquest.
Oh, my God.
And Kazan gets shot by the river. They dump the body in the river, and the guys drop the gun, and the guy picks up the gun, and they pistol whip the guy. He wakes up, picks up the gun, he shoots Kazan, and Kazan gets shot. He has my favorite death line. He goes, geez, I never figured on that at all. And he dies.
That's a great one.
And that's
a real tearjerker at the end because he goes blind at the end with Ann Sheridan. So you were always my girl, Peg. At the end he's selling newspapers. And it's like, James. It's so that was an inspiration. And then when I saw theater, when I was a teenager, my mother would take me to some plays, and I did get a chance to see Al Pacino do "Does a Tiger Wear a Necktie?" And
did you really?
I didn't, know who he was, but my mother and I were like, "Wow, who's that guy?" In that play, and we saw some musicals, Ben Vereen, and it was like just watching live performers. I thought, wow, maybe that's something I could do because I never knew anyone in the movies.
What made you think? For me, it's interesting because for me, I never dreamed of that. Like I thought movie stars were like hatched in pods on some other planet, and they flew them here in a spaceship, and nobody really went and did that for a living.
No, I mean we knew a prop man. He lived across the street from us, and that was like as close as I was to the movies. So theater was the first entree about maybe trying to do that, in college, because I had seen live theater. I thought movies was really a faraway, possibility. Especially, there weren't that many guys who, it wasn't until I saw Dustin Hoffman, actually, which when I saw clips for the Academy Award, I was too young to see Midnight Cowboy. I was shocked. I remember seeing him, I was like, wow, this guy looks like someone in our family. What's he doing in the movie?
They made a movie about it.
Yeah, how can he be in a movie, And I was like kind of shocked to see him. And it was kind of shocking because he sort of opened the doors for these other Pacino and De Niro and all those guys. And but that was real. I never forget seeing those clips of for the Academy Awards. And,
sure.
And of course I couldn't go to see it because I was too young. It was rated X.
Yeah, you forget that. Now, when you went to New Paltz, you went for drama. They have
English.
a wonderful drama.
And
program
I had did a minor in English, and and I was.
And you were there for 4 years.
Yes, my first play I did was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I played Chief Brandon. Because this Italian teacher said, listen, you probably could play an Indian, so you should audition for it. And I was like, all right.
Different times, folks. Different times.
Can't do that now. Yeah. If you see a lot of those guys, who were Indians, like Anthony Quinn, he played Indians, originally.
Yeah. Jeff Chandler.
Yeah. Burt Lancaster. Apache.
He had the body. He could ride a horse.
So, So that was, but that was my first play.
And when you were there, what evolved for you? Because I remember I went to acting school at NYU. I went for 1 year. And I'd gone to GW to study political science. I was going to go to law school. And I go to NYU for like a year. And I come there, And I think I just barely got enough of a taste of what it could be like to propel me. Then I got a job, and I went on and on about my path. But like when you were at New Paltz, what do you remember propelled you want to keep going?
Well, I did a few plays, A View from the Bridge, Cuckoo's Nest. Later on, I did Night of the...
You just dug it. You just loved it.
I felt like I found something that I was very raw, and I was not that, skilled. I remember one teacher thought I was, but I wasn't afraid, to try things. And I had a few teachers who took me under their wing, and they had a major influence on
Name
me.
one.
Beverly Brum. She passed away, but
What did she give you? What did she do for you?
She basically educated me in many different ways, and taught me how to break down a script, how to play an objective, how to listen to the other actor, how to work physically, and she spent so much time with me, out of the classroom too, that I had a bunch of teachers. They really cared about me, and they cared about other students, and I'm still friends with. I never cut off my relationship with those people.
It's interesting because I think about people who, and it is kind of a latent learning. Like they say things to you and it comes back to you even
That's
years later, what they said to you. I remember I had a woman, Mira Rostova, who died.
She's wonderful.
Rostova was my teacher for a year. She taught in an apartment that she borrowed from a friend of hers over by the old Barney's, which is now the new Barney's again. They're back. Boy, we lived in New York a long time now. Barney's is back on 17th and 7th. I never thought I'd see the day. And but she was my teacher, and she passed away a few years ago. She was 99 years old, and we did a scene once. I'll never forget this incredible lesson she gave me of not playing everything at the expense of the other actor.
Right.
Because you're a very warm and very generous actor. You have a great passion, but you're not selfish, and that's such an incredible thing I see in people. I'm always drawn to actors like that, because Rostova would be there, and the actors would do the scene. And the guy's at the table, and the woman comes in her trench coat, and she has her pocketbook and her bag of groceries or whatever. And the guy goes, she comes in and says, "Hi." And he goes, "What time is it?" Right. He says.
Yeah, right.
And she goes, "It's 6 o'clock." He says, "Where you been?"
Yeah, right.
Rostova literally goes, "Okay, let's stop."
That's right. Well, that's right.
And she was obviously had a very heavy accent. She says, "Why you talk to her like this? What time is it? Where you been?"
Because he prepared it. That's why
Right.
he wanted to show
He
you.
says, "Why don't you not say, what time is it?
Right.
Where you been?" He says, "Where you were going, we have plenty of time to get there." You know what I mean? Because I worked in daytime a lot, did a soap. And there were guys we used to joke about who they always were going to lay into you in the scene. You know?
Right.
Even when they said they loved you, they were like, "I love you, Mary.
Yeah.
God damn it, I love you." And they were really like all that tension. You know what I mean? Did you feel that you had that innately, that kind of generosity of spirit you have?
I think I was a pretty good listener, but I think I refined it when I studied the Sandy Meisner technique at Carnegie Hall with Robert X. Modica. That's what it's all about, listening and responding and letting your partner affect you and doing out of that. And I thought that was very, very good training, and it's essential. And I know a lot about Mira because I had a friend, Michael Bartolucco, who studied with her, and she was Montgomery Clift's teacher, was she
was
not?
Clift's teacher, yeah.
Wow.
His private coach.
Well, I'll tell you, boy, I just saw From Here to Eternity for about 45th time the other night, and boy, is he great.
And she was banned almost from them. They talk about him doing films with like Dimitrik, and he would endure the notes of the director. Remember, was it Patty Bosworth or somebody wrote Monty, and then they said that he would endure the notes of the director, and then go off to the wings of the set to get his real notes from Rostova.
Right.
But then you decide to go to Yale. Why did you not want to dive in and go right to work?
I did. I tried to go to work. I was very shy about going out there and hustling. I was a school teacher for a while. I taught at. I was a substitute. I taught at Rice High School in Harlem.
What'd you teach?
American history. And I also taught at a Catholic school called Our Lady Queen of Martyr, 5th and 6th graders. And I got invited back to both of these things. But I was doing showcases, and my teacher, Beverly Brum, had gone to Yale. And I thought, you know what? I don't know really how to hustle that much. I was kind of shy. So I applied to NYU and to Yale. And I did a classical monologue, which is the second, and I did a monologue from a play that I had done in New Paltz by Jason Miller called Lou Gehrig Did Not Die of Cancer. And it was a great monologue. And the guy talked about his relationship with his father, and it was all about being at a baseball game, and you had a baseball. And I got into both programs, and I got a scholarship to Yale. And I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. And, my father was overjoyed because he loved the masonry work at Yale. I kept showing him. He was like, he didn't care. He was like, oh my God, look at the buildings, and he was like, oh my God.
Now that's a building.
Yeah. So, and then I worked a lot there, and I did all new plays, got classical plays, Chekhov.
Who was a teacher there that affected you?
Well, Andre Belgrado, who I've worked with for many years. I've done a lot of plays with him. He was someone I really loved. There was, we had good speech teacher, good movement teacher. But Andre is the person who I've probably kept the most in contact with. And just by doing it, and failing at some of these plays, it's. I finally got to do a Chekhov play a few years ago. I got to do the Cherry Orchard, and after all those years of working on all those scenes, I don't think it hurts. It doesn't hurt.
I've got so many things I want to ask you. This is driving me crazy.
Okay.
So when you get out of Yale, and what do you do then?
Lloyd Richards gave me a job. I auditioned. I got, at the Eugene O'Neill Center, and I did 2 plays, one by Keith Radine, who was a friend of mine, and one by John Patrick Shanley. And that's how I met John. And I did the light version of Danny in the Deep Blue Sea. And then eventually John, brought me back to do a workshop at Circle Rep, and then I did it later on at the Actors Theater of Louisville, and then we brought it to New York, and really that was my entree, people seeing me on stage, and I got other work, from that play, and John really had a big effect on me. He wanted me to be in like everything he wrote at that time, and I did every reading, but he was really supportive of me, and even though sometimes we would butt heads and stuff as young guys, he's the one who really fought for me to be in 5 Corners, and I really owe a lot to John.
The 5 Corners was the movie with
Jodie Foster and Tim Robbins, and I played the guy who threw.
And John didn't direct that movie.
No, Tony Bill did.
Right, Tony
Bill did. Yeah, but
I auditioned for that movie.
Yeah,
did Jim Metzler do that movie? I'm trying to remember who the other actor was. Yeah, I auditioned.
I don't know. There was some Gregory Rozakis who was in it. He was this crazy guy, but John was, that was a big, entree, and he was a big influence on me, and so that was the beginning really. And then I started getting in some movies, and I worked with Billy Friedkin, and I lived to talk about it. And I worked with Michael Cimino and lived to talk about it.
Talk about that. You did To Live and Die in L.A.
Yeah.
With Friedkin.
Yeah, and that was a pretty wild movie. It was with Bill Peterson and Willem Dafoe and Johnny Pankow. And none of us, I don't think, had been, maybe Willem had been in the movie. And he was pretty out there guy. And you had to be careful physically. You didn't know what he was going to do to you. And we worked in a prison with prisoners, with guys on towers with machine guns, and we all had altercations with him on the film. And I didn't know, this is what movie making is like, that maybe the director will jump on top of you, but he did. And I learned to survive that. And I think I learned a lot from working with him and working with Cimino, because you didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, it was kind of the cocaine 80s, but there were directors that, would tell the other actor, hit him in the face, slap him in the face. Even if we were doing a scene like this,
Right. Even if you were the patient and they were a doctor.
Right, I was a doctor. Hit him in the face.
Hit him in the face, Bob.
Hit him in the face. So it was like the deer hunter scene, the Russian roulette scene, applied to every other scene.
Yeah.
And, but I learned to ride a horse on the film I worked with Cimino, and I think I learned
The
a
Sicilian?
lot. Yeah, and it was really, I was like the only Italian person in the entire movie. You know what I mean? And I was Italian American. I'm half Sicilian, and everyone else was from all over the world. And but I think those movies really helped me for later on to be able to stand up for myself and say, no, I don't agree. I'm not going to do that.
But and is that a part of it? Meaning, because for me, I remember the beginning of my career, and you might find this hard to believe. I was actually very guileless, and I was very tender, and I get to work, and I didn't want to piss anybody off. Until
Right.
You're the guest in their house, and you
That's
want to
right.
be professional, and you confuse professionalism with kind of laying down and just
Laying
dying.
down,
You know
that's
what I mean?
right.
Just laying down and not having an opinion.
Right.
And the minute you start to have an opinion about anything,
Right.
people are like, oh, Jesus Christ, that you're difficult. And it's very interesting that you say that you, I remember on a couple occasions, I'd sit there and I'd say, I don't, this doesn't really make sense to me. And I wound up where, like, the director and I wouldn't even speak
Right.
for like 3 months. It's a very difficult process.
No,
when
it's
you and
hard
the
to
director
speak
are
up.
not speaking for 3 months.
Because I think the fear of being fired, if you're an actor, it's so hard to get hired. The fear of being fired is held over your head, and you have to get to the point where you don't care if you'll be fired. To say I'm not going to do that. And I did that on Five Corners the first day, and the guy tried to block a scene, and
Bill.
and I said I don't want to do it. And he said, what? I said, nope. And I wanted to be sitting against the wall because the guy had gotten out of prison. And I kind of laid it down. And from then on, it was a collaborative experience because I spoke up, and I think
What do you think it was, other than a strong sense of what you're doing, that made you so vigilant about that?
Well, because I had been through giving that up a little bit before, like knowing that this scene is
Where?
not playing right with Cimino.
Oh, with those two were prior to
yeah.
the one with Bill.
Right. And, so I had been shocked a little bit. And I just decided, I said, you know what? I have to stand up for myself when I believe in something. And I don't have to do it in a rude way, but, and that was the beginning. And then I had a very good collaboration during that movie. And that's the first movie I felt like I was doing what I could do on stage, but in a movie.
And then what happens after you do Five
Then I
Corners?
started getting, different, people, Spike Lee, called me up. The Coen brothers knew me because I went to school with Francis McDormand. So they saw all the plays I was in. So they would see me all the time. I became kind of friends with them. So then they eventually told me they were writing a part for me. But it took them such a long time to write Miller's Crossing because they had writer's block. And in the middle of it, they wrote Barton Fink. That's how they wrote Barton Fink. And so then I did, Spike asked me to come in, and I read Do the Right Thing, and because he saw Five Corners, and I was excited when I read it. I said, well, this is about what's going on. And I grew up in a black neighborhood. I moved to a white neighborhood. I was bused out to an all-black school. So a lot of the issues were issues that I grew up with, and Spike and I really became very, very close friends through that experience.
How many films have you made with him now?
I've done like maybe 4 or 5 films where I've had real big roles, and then like lots of cameos. But I'd love to work with him again, and he's a dear friend.
No, not to dwell too much on that film, even though it's, I guess, the film came out in '90. So last year you had the 25th anniversary.
Yeah, we had the
they had some
25th
event
anniversary,
for that.
yeah.
Right? Did they screen it there in the city? What was that like for you to go back and?
Well, it was weird because I was I played the racist guy. So when we would go to dailies, which Spike invited everyone to at LI Long Island University on Flatbush in Brooklyn, you'd see the 5 takes of me saying all these racist things. And sometimes there were people in the crew who had never worked on a movie before, like the lady in craft services, and she was a black lady, and she wouldn't talk to me. You know what I mean? She actually told me, she said, I hate you. She told me, I hate you so much. And I told Spike, I said, man, tell us I'm doing a part, man. He was laughing and stuff like that. So I was kind of, worried about, what would happen. But it was only really positive the response you had. But what was your question? I'm sorry. I got.
It doesn't really matter at this point. Just keep telling us the story.
But I've been in a hot spot so when 25th anniversary comes, I figured, okay, I'm like past that point. I was worried when the movie came out. I thought, am I going to get flack on the subways for playing this character? And I have only gotten tremendous warmth for, I don't know how many years, 26 years from that portrayal, because it was honest. But when we saw the 25th anniversary, Michael Jackson had just died, and I have a line in the movie where he goes, fuck you, fuck Frank Sinatra. I say, yeah, fuck you and fuck Michael Jackson too. And it was right after he died. And once again, the audience let out this big response. I was like, oh my God, I can never get away.
Go back to zero
again, you know. You know, it was an exciting movie, and lots of people had different opinions about the movie, even in the people in the movie. And
while you were shooting?
Yeah, well, we had a long rehearsal process.
Describe that.
And Spike let us improvise, and I was very low, and he would always say, speak up, John, and because I had to say all these things. And then, you know, Rosie Perez was very, you know, adamant about, you know, what she thought was right, and the guys who played the cornermen thought, well, maybe they, you know, one of them should have had a job, and there were all these great conversations that went on. And we had a real great group there because we all worked together for 10 weeks. We were on the set every day together. We rehearsed for 3 weeks.
In Brooklyn.
Yeah. And Danny, of course, was...
I just saw him the other day on the street.
Yeah.
Up by Lincoln Center. Oh, my God.
I mean, you know, so he was, you know, flying high, and Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee. And it was very upsetting to do the end of the movie. It was very upsetting to do the end of it. It was really upsetting. And there was a lot of tension on the set between Danny and Spike about doing the scene the way Spike wanted. And it was...
Did this way Spike wanted it prevail? Is that what's in the
Eventually, it did. It did. But it got really heated. And it actually came close to things getting a little out of control. But we managed, you know, through it and everything. But, you know, we were all really close, and I remember it was really noisy.
Aiello's Italian too, right?
Yeah.
Is this an Italian thing, this passion about the
I think he had a kind of a John Wayne type of thing, you know, more than an Italian thing. He didn't want to be pulled over the counter a certain way. And his son, who passed away, was a wonderful man, Danny Aiello, you know, his, Junior. Danny was his stunt double. You know, but I was in the middle of all the riot stuff, and I took a beating, you know. But I remember I just didn't. It was sickening, you know, to do some of that part. I remember me with Giancarlo Esposito, and we had our hands around each other's throats, and you could just feel like, you know, because we were all really, you know, so close. And then we worked together on other movies after that and stuff. But I have to say, it was such a. Eventually, I got very, very comfortable, and I told Spike, there are other things you haven't put in your script. I said, and you should put them. And he was like, tell me, him and Ernest Dickerson. And I did. And they put him in.
In that film?
Oh, yeah, plenty. I added, you know, plenty of things to it because there were things he didn't know, you know, that were said about, you know, black people. And he was very collaborative. And you know, I've always had great experiences with him, you know, Jungle Fever and, you know, Clockers. But that was a really special experience. And also the crew was all black, you know, it was black people, a lot of black people. And I had never worked with a crew that was, you know, and he gave all these people opportunities. And Ernest Dickerson, who's a dear friend and has directed me in movies. So it was really like, sort of, he grew up with an Italian neighborhood, I grew up in a black neighborhood. And it was like we just hit it off.
No, during this time, that film was shot in 1989, 90?
It was shot in the summer of 88.
88, because it came out in 90, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that. But are you in and out of the theater as well at that time?
Yeah, I did a play, and then I did Shanley's play, Italian American Reconciliation, and then I did Miller's Crossing.
Barton Fink.
That was after Miller's Crossing.
It was after?
Yeah, it was after. Miller's Crossing was first, and did that, and then they told me that they had written this movie for me, and I thought they said Bart and Fink, and then, you know, then I mean, and out of that movie, I got a lot of work and stuff, but I always went back to the theater and you know, and continued to do theater.
Now, you met your wife
At Yale.
At Yale.
Yeah.
And she was studying acting, obviously,
Yeah,
as well.
we've worked together many times.
And you've directed her with that movie you did, Mac.
Yeah.
She was the star of the film.
And she was a star of Illuminata, and I've done a theater with her, Master Builder.
What's that like to direct your wife in a film?
Well, at
I
first,
was married to an actress once. I'm not quite sure how that would have gone.
at first, it's not good because like your brother. Or I've directed. I've had my mother, my brother, and if they all first and they go no, like you tell them, can you do this? No. It's like that's the first, and then eventually you have to learn like to respect each other. She's the actress, I'm the director, and we have to kind of draw lines and separate that. And it's not easy to do. I've talked to even people like Joe Cohen, and he's like, I let my brother direct Fran. You know what I mean? He says, it can be, but it can be great once you get past that. So, and I think I've had really good collaborations with Kathy, and I think she's done some, wonderful work. In the
She doesn't want to act anymore?
No, she's now studying social work at NYU.
What do you observe about that where that just kind of goes, that just leaves somebody's body? She doesn't want to,
Well,
she doesn't,
I
not
think it
interested
happens. I'm sure it's probably happened to you. You think at one time in your life, maybe it's something I want to do different.
It's happened to me sometimes while I'm on the set shooting a film. I'll be like,
yeah.
I want to go home.
I mean, I had a sort of crisis maybe 10 years ago, and told my doctor, I said, I'm done with this business. I've got to do something really important like what you do. I said, I want to go to medical school. I was like 50 years old. And he was like, John, you're crazy.
Yeah.
He was like, how long medical school takes, And he said, like, what you do there's a value to what you do. And I was like, no, there's not, And then he talked me out of it. And, but, it's, everyone hits that, I guess, at some time.
I think I topped you, actually, which is I got married to a much younger woman, and I have 3 kids in 3 years.
So there you go.
So that's what I'm doing beyond outside my career right now, is living this crazy life with 3 little kids. But but it's interesting how to describe, and I'd love to hear this in your own words. The acting experience where you're so into it, no matter how. And a lot of it has to do with the people that I'm working with. Like if they can hit the ball back, you know what I mean? Like if I really like somebody,
sure.
I did this movie that was, it didn't really come out the way I wanted it to. I mean, most of them don't.
Right, that's
and
right.
It's such a collaborative thing. And if everybody shows up and everybody's perfect, then and a lot of times maybe the movie's just going to be okay. There's a weird chemistry. There's a weird lightning that has to strike. I did this movie, The Edge, with Tony Hopkins, and I'll never forget. They called me and they said, De Niro was supposed to play the lead, and he dropped out. And I did this reading in Los Angeles with the director, and Mamet wrote the screenplay. Everybody was very, very excited because it was a weird, very Baroque piece in the way they wrote it originally. And then they called me and said, De Niro was out, and we're going to find somebody else. They said, we got Anthony Hopkins, and I started to cry. I mean, I'll never forget, I was on vacation with my ex-wife and her family. We were in Carolina at this beach house. And I sat there, I was starting to get like these chest palpitations because I worshiped Tony so much. I just loved Tony. And I thought, I'm going to get to go make a movie. It's me and him. You know what I mean? Harold Perrineau, who was on the show Lost, African-American guy, very young, very good-looking. He had the funniest line, because the 3 of us are lost in the woods. And he said, Alec Baldwin, Anthony Hopkins, and Harold Perrineau. I wonder which one the bear is going to eat first. And so he dies in the film. Page 40, page 30, he gets chewed on. And he was very funny, Harold. But we do the movie, and there's Tony and I in the woods for like 4, 5, 6 weeks there in Canada. And it was just such a great, I loved it.
And he's a wonderful person.
Yeah. I got so excited, and plays I've done with people that I loved, and then I love it. Then the rest of the time I'm like, it's tough.
Yeah, it's
tough.
It's really. I actually did a movie that he directed me in, that he wrote, which I've never seen actually.
Tony.
Slipstream, it's called, and I had so much fun working with him. I play someone who's like a figment of his imagination, and he said to me once, he said, John, he said, I'd like you to do this scene. He said, excuse the metaphor. He said, like a cockroach on fire. I said, Mr. Hopkins, you are speaking my language. So we laughed. We had so much fun. He's such an open guy.
Oh, yeah.
he's such a wonderful, attractive guy, and like you, I've always loved his work from Equus and QB7. You know, when I first saw him.
So I can't believe you said that.
Yeah, I mean, it was my mother who told me to watch him on that. But he's a wonderful person.
We do the film, and I said to him, "My God, you worked with Olivier.
Right.
You worked at the feet of Olivier. That was your apprenticeship at the London, the Royal Academy or whatever, and the National Theatre, rather." And I said, "And you did all these plays, and they're from this great tradition." And I said, "Don't you ever miss the theatre and doing plays?" He was like, "No, I hate the theatre.
He hates theater.
I loathe and detest the theatre."
Yeah, he hates the
I was
theater.
like, "Really, you do?" I said, "You never want to go back and do a play?" He says, "No, I only want." He said, "All my life I wanted to move to California." He said, "And become an American film star." He said, "Drive my car with the top down, the sun in my face, the wind in my hair." And he wasn't kidding.
No, he's
But
not
what
kidding.
he does now,
No, he's not.
this was his dream, was to be a movie star.
Yeah. But
He doesn't give a shit about
no, he hates theater.
Shakespeare or Pinter or none of it. There's great tradition.
He will ask you, "Why do you like to do theater?" You know, you say, "Well, I like the rehearsal process." Pick a film. I mean, obviously there's many because you've got so many great films and so much great work. Where you're doing it and you're in it and you're like, "Man, this is just bliss to me making this film, playing this role." Well, some of the movies that we just talked about. When I worked with Robert Redford, when I did Quiz Show. Yeah, I gained a lot of weight and everything to do it, but I had to keep that up throughout the shooting. But that was a really fun experience, and I loved working with him. And he was
How so?
he cast me early in the process, and then he couldn't figure out who he wanted to cast and whatever. And so I got to be I got to know him quite well. And he's just like multifaceted, kind of eccentric guy, and he just was so good in specific details, physical details to help free you. And we got along just incredibly well. And I think probably shows maybe in my performance, I really was very free, with him. And I really wanted to please him. I really did, because he was so good looking. No, he is, and he's very, he's really seductive, in getting you to be relaxed and everything. And we just, it was interesting watching him with the other actors. But I love
Paymer,
Morrow,
Rafe.
With Rafe was, he really kind of gave Rafe a lesson in kind of screen acting some days, because Rafe was coming off of Schindler's List, and he was trying to lose weight, and he was a little nervous with it, and that would have been the role that Redford probably would have played. But he was a real consummate craftsman. He's from the theater, and I loved working with him, and that was a real joy. And also a movie I made with a great Italian director, Francesco Rosi, which was an adaptation of a Primo Levi book, La Tregua. And I was involved with that for about 5 years. And I think that's one of the best things I've ever done. I don't really talk a lot in film. But I also got a real education with him in Italian filmmaking. And also I got to study everything about Primo Levi for like 4 or 5 years. And I think it really changed my life.
So I don't like the word foodie, but you're somebody who you appreciate. You're into cooking. You and your wife are into cooking. Is it true you guys sit down, you have like these meals? And
well, my wife's a really good cook, and I help prepare and clean. So and eat. But I think
Did
as
you
far
grow
as
up in a household?
my
Like
mother was a great.
She was a
cook.
world-class cook.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of my friends would come over to my house to eat. So and they also like to talk to my father, who was a very good storyteller. So my father was like very childlike in his. Like if he'd watch movies with him, he was like he was in the movie. There's a movie that we used to watch together, Brute Force, that Burt Lancaster was in. Have you seen that with Ewan Crone?
Yeah.
And my father was like in the movie. So that's how it was at my house. Like you were in it.
My dad was the same way.
Yeah.
My dad would come home from work and we'd lay there. And my mother was kind of, with 6 children and no money to help her raise her children. My mother was completely, blotto at the end of the night, asleep in her bed at like 10 o'clock. And I'd say, who's going to let Dad in the house? I literally had a run of time. Probably lasted about 2 or 3 years where I got away with this. I'd say, I'm going to stay up and make sure Dad's okay when he gets home. And Mother would be like, and I'd go in the living room and wait for my father to come home. And I'd greet my father. Everybody else is asleep. And my father would be like, very, taciturn. What are you doing up? It's 11:30. And I'd say, we'd sit down on the couch and he'd open up the New York Times. And they used to have those really pithy little capsule reviews in the Times of movies on The Late Show.
Right.
And he'd say, oh, that's a good one. I'd say, what's that? He'd say, How Green Was My Valley. It's a great movie. And I go, well, maybe we watch like 15 minutes of it. He'd be like, all right, 15 minutes. We're going to watch 15 minutes of this movie. Then once you get upstairs, you get to bed. You got to go to school tomorrow. And I'd sit there, and within 15 minutes, it worked like a charm. He'd pass out asleep.
Right.
And I'd watch all of How Green Was My Valley till 1 o'clock in the morning on the Late Show. And at times that we would watch the movies together, he would like put his hand out during the moment, he wishes to be accorded the same rights as a sponge. And my father would go, he wishes to think, like Spencer Tracy and so forth. My father would quote all the lines.
Well,
maybe it was the same for you, right?
Yeah, no, it was a real kind of sharing experience.
Now, your wife's a great cook. She comes from an Italian household. Your wife.
No, my wife's Russian Jewish.
I'm kidding. Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. No. She learned to cook.
The Borowitz section of Bari, Italy.
She learned to cook.
Did she learn to cook from your family? How did she learn to cook? She's self-taught?
She has increased her repertoire over the years, yes. She's a very good cook.
And you made movies where this is the central...
Well, I've made movies. I made a documentary called Passione, which is all about Neapolitan music, because I was introduced to Neapolitan culture by Francesco Rosi. I've actually performed in the theater in Italy twice. I did an Eduardo Di Filippo play and a Calvino adaptation of Italian fairy tales. But that's an interesting experience, performing in the theater in Italy. It's very interesting.
How so?
Well, I did this one play. It's a play. It's like a neo-realist play. It's a play about poor people, and the guy who's married to this woman, she has a lover, but he either imagines or he just makes him into a ghost because the guy leaves money, for the whole thing. And at the end of the play, the guy goes away. He doesn't want to be the lover of his wife anymore, and the money dries up. And he sees the guy, and he thinks he's a ghost, or maybe he's made himself think he's a ghost. And he explains to him, it's hard to be in love when you don't have money. If you can't buy someone a pair of earrings or a nice handkerchief, the love can die. If you're poor and you're starving. It's a beautiful speech, and it was written in 1946 by Eduardo Di Filippo. So I came out to do it in Naples, in English mostly. We did a little bit of Neapolitan, and when I came out to do the speech, I saw rows. I said the first line, and I saw rows of handkerchiefs come out of people's jackets, rows. And I was like, whoa, because it distracts you, right? It's the white in the audience. And then I said a couple more lines, and then they were all, working themselves up. They were doing this, basically the speech for me. It was like I was surfing on their emotion. So I just had to say the line, and then you heard, oh! You know what I mean? And I was like, I can't believe this. I said, I haven't even done the speech. And so I was just kind of floating on this sea of white handkerchiefs. I never had experience like that ever in my life. It was like an out-of-body experience. And that place is a very crazy place. And they're very superstitious, and it's really, it's a fascinating place. But I never experienced anything like that in my life.
When you do, we talked about this backstage, and I'm still very curious about this. I see people now, in my own work, or in my own life, where you are pitching and trying to make films and
right.
Television shows and what have you, and it's so difficult to raise money now. It's this almost mind-bendingly difficult prospect. And from my experience, there's so many people. I did a couple films where there's people where a group of investors who are not filmmakers. They have
right.
money that's in play to invest
right.
in a project. And the moment something else came along where they could get a quarter of a point more of interest.
Right.
We were going to make a film once, and we were told, like on the eve of the money being put into a bank account for us to start a hard prep on the film. They said, "Oh, the guys got the word that they're going to put the money instead into a strip mall somewhere, in Houston," and they were gone. And this idea that the business was run years ago by people who were filmmakers. They had money. Studios were banks with billions of dollars in lines of credit up through the 80s, and then at some point. That changed, and now that we were that whole spiel about the corporatization of the media and so forth. But for a long, long time, in the beginning of my career, it was still people that were filmmakers,
Right.
And they had other people's money they were spending. But if they couldn't make a good film themselves, they knew who could. They knew who to put together to get the job done, by and large. And now that seems to have changed. How has it changed in your mind? In the
It's
time
much
you've been in
harder.
the business?
It's much harder. I mean, the first movie I made was a Columbia TriStar Home Video. Was Larry Estes, who gave money to a lot of small films, including Sex, Lies, and Videotape, One False Move. He must have done like 45 movies he financed. And I think we had a little over $2 million, but I had 43 days to shoot my first film. And my second film, I had 40 days. And the film I did with, then I had maybe 45 days, and then I had 30 days with the movie I made with Woody. And this last film, I had 28 days. And, you're not 25. And, it's hard to light someone, beautifully in that amount of time. So you have to cobble it together if you're lucky enough. But I feel like people don't always bet on the person. And when I first started making movies, there were a few people I would talk to, and they would bet on me. They would say, "Okay, I trust you." There was a man in Japan gave me money for my second movie, and
How did that happen?
He was a distributor, and he would look at my presentation, saw all the pictures and the artwork, but he was also looking at me, and trying to and judging me as a person, and he was he bet on me. Not just all the people, all the names I have in it. So it's hard, it's hard to make a movie because no one ever thinks about chemistry. That's like the last thing people ever think about. And that it can be essential in a movie, whether you're playing your best friend or lovers or whatever. And, almost everything is set up against you. So you have to be a little crazy and really love the material to say, I'm going to do something that's different. But of course, if you do that, then it's even harder, because everybody's afraid until it comes out and it's, I made that movie with Woody, for example, because for years, Woody loves you, I know that. But Woody, I've always thought, well, maybe we would be interesting together. And the guy who cuts my hair cuts Woody's hair. And I happened to mention it to him. The guy, not this hair,
right.
but who cuts my hair, Anthony, cuts Woody's hair, and he talks like this, and he told Woody this idea that I had, and Woody was like, well, have John call me, so, and I was like, what did you say to Woody? I told him this idea, so I went to Woody's office. I had no script, nothing, but I had directed some movies, and Woody, you know Woody well, because you work with him a lot. And I sat this close to him, and he said, "So, we share a barber." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yes." So I told him the story. I said, you run a bookstore, you run out of money, and then, you decide to pimp me out, and blah blah blah. He goes, "Funny." Then I said something else. He goes, "Not funny." Then another something else could be funny. So then he said, "You write it, and then I'll give you my criticism." Of course, I didn't know how merciless his criticism could be.
Was it?
And, oh my God, it was beyond merciless. And at the end of it, of course, he said, "Well, I could be wrong." So anytime I would send him another draft, I would lay down and read his email. It was just. But during the course of it, he asked me,
Xanax.
he asked me to direct these 3 one-acts, one of them that he had written, and I got to know him quite well.
Right.
And from that, I was able to rewrite it.
Who were the other two?
One by Elaine May,
Elaine May.
and Ethan Cohen, and I survived. But I went through. I did all these auditions with Woody, which was fascinating. God, he's a tough guy to audition for. but I got to know him really well, and eventually, he did sign off on the script, and he did a terrific job, and he was a wonderful actor to work with. He's such a good actor, and I was like, wow, this guy's good, and so, but there was a great experience. But I did 15 drafts, and he,
Kicked your teeth out.
he was
every
just
time.
like, and when I showed him the rough cut, he said, "Do you want my criticism?" And I was like, I said, "Well, of course I do." Because, well, he said, he was sitting in the chair. He goes, "I'm gonna be brutal," and he really liked it. He was so surprised, and I was like, "Wow," I was. But it was a great, experience, and I tailored it obviously to him. But my idea that we could be good together was true.
But the funny thing when I worked with him was the difference between that chasm between comedy and drama.
Oh my God!
So we do Blue Jasmine, and Kate Blanchett is drinking Diet Cokes and chain smoking, and she's got to come in and do the scene where she comes apart, and we have this physical altercation in this house. We're at this big estate out in the Gold Coast of Nassau County, in like Mutton Town or Ladding Town or something. Beautiful horse farm. And Kate comes in and she does the scene, and Woody's like, you're supposed to be at your wit's end here in this scene, and I'm just not buying it. I mean, you're supposed to be coming apart, completely coming apart. And we do another take, and she does the take, and she just wrings herself out. He's like, I'm just not buying it. I'm sorry. You really have to be just shattered, and you're broken into a mess. You're just a puddle of your own loss and everything. And she's smoking and drinking the coffee, and she comes in. She blows it. I hate to be the bearer of bad news all the time here.
Yeah, that's how
and he
he
just wrings her out, wrings her out. Then we
I've
turn
heard.
around, we do a scene, and he goes, in this scene, say to her, that she ought to go back to seeing that therapist of hers, and they just say some doctor's name, and I go, and he's looking down at the floor, and she's here, and you're me, and he goes, just ad-lib some doctor's name, and I go, Dr. Fetterman. He went, nothing funny.
Yeah.
Like, that's funny. No funny in this. There's not
well,
the funny
that's
movie.
a whole other thing with
whole
him.
other thing.
He's tough, man. He's a tough dude.
Now, when the time we have left, because we are going to run out of time, unfortunately. So I want to talk to you about the HBO series. So I'm, and this is a true story. I'll tell it quickly. I'm at Jimmy Gandolfini's memorial service. Jimmy passes away. I love Jimmy.
I was there too.
Jimmy was everybody who knew Jimmy loved Jimmy. He's a real great guy, a sweetheart, and so talented. And and I don't say this to be glib. It's like I'm not a big TV watcher, and I was home. I mean, it was the same thing. 60 Minutes, Chinese food, Sopranos, Big Love, hit the sack. I mean, that was my Sunday. I was home every Sunday watching. I was addicted to that show, addicted to Jimmy. And he passes away. They're going to shelve that project. And as I'm sitting there in the memorial service, Azalea is behind me. Sitting behind me. They were waiting for everybody to file in. And I'm, for about 15 seconds, I'm on the verge of pitching myself to Zalian for Jimmy's part at Jimmy's memorial service.
Actors.
Exactly. I'm going to turn to Zalian and go, But anyway, no, I didn't do that. But so the whole thing goes away, and then it comes back, and you are the star of the show.
When they,
How did that happen?
I guess my agent, Steve wanted me to be in his first movie, Searching for Bobby Fischer. So we've always I know he liked my work and I liked him a lot. And I guess my name came up and he really responded to it. And my agent talked to him. And then we met. And then he told me that it was James. And I didn't know it at that time. And James was the lead in my movie, Romance and Cigarettes. So I worked with James 2 years on it. I also know him from the time he did your play, because he's dear friends with my cousin Aida, and he's the one who helped cast her on The Sopranos. And I was very close to James, and I really had a lot of trepidation about it. And then I saw the pilot, which was much, much longer, and James was only in it for one little scene. Of course, he's still interesting with a big beard and everything, but he never talks to the guy, he just talks to the cop. And I said, okay, there's not that much of James that I have to kind of not think about. And then I read the other scripts, a couple of them, because by then they had written the rest of them. I think they had only written 2 when James was alive. And then I read all of them, and I saw, how great they were. And Richard is someone I've loved for years, his books. I've worked on a couple of his movies, and I could see the quality of it. And then, I said, I would like to do it if you want me. And I had a lot of time to prepare with Steve and with Richard and meeting. I had like 4 months to really think about it, and it was a really challenging experience. But I got to work with Bill Camp, he did his first job with me, Jeannie Berlin, and Riz Ahmed, who's wonderful in the show, is a wonderful guy. And I just happened to really hit it off with him as like people. I think it really helped us in the scenes. But it's about the system. It's about racism. It's about the city. It's about the criminal justice system. And when you read that article in the New Yorker about Khalif Bruder, the kid who was accused of stealing a backpack, it's right on the money. And he was someone I actually wanted to meet, and then he took his own life. But I was really, deeply interested and affected by doing something that I thought was a real fair representation. And Steve was indefatigable in his pursuit of truth and, minutia and detail. And it was a great, you have to be given an opportunity to do something. So I knew, I said, well, this is a good opportunity, and I gave it my all.
And what prior to that was the last time you did a television project before that?
I had done I played Billy Martin in The Bronx Must Be Burning. The Bronx is Burning, and that was a movie. That was ESPN. It was an ESPN miniseries, and I did a TV movie about Monday Night Football years ago that Ernest Dickerson did. I played Howard Cosell. But I had never done anything with this amount of time that they had and money. And and with all the wonderful people that I got to work with, and it was a big experience. And I did think of Jimmy. I did. I as a motivating factor. Kind of have him in my pocket like a rabbit's foot. Because I thought I want to do a good job for myself, for everybody. But it was strange at first. But then once I did the character, you have to make it your. You make it your own.
It's funny how that Jimmy. It's impossible to compare people. It just is. I mean, I used to try to play that game and think of like, who would be better in this role, or who would I like to see do this, or what have you. And it's a waste of time. But when he passed away, and Jimmy was somebody who he had his signature range and stamp and persona, and so much of it obviously dictated by one of the most successful TV shows ever. I always say, Sarah Jessica and he occupy this unusual space where they changed the fortunes of an entire company. Prior to that, original programming at HBO was probably like two guys at a desk at the end of the hall, and they just showed movies and boxing matches and stuff. And,
I mean, you knew him right from the beginning, I mean, you really
I'll never
knew
forget
him.
the show becomes a hit, and Greg Mosier calls me on the phone. I'm asleep. I flew in from L.A. I was in my New York apartment. I was sound asleep. My phone rings, and I was going to maybe meet Mosier later that week about something. It was probably, whatever the second year of the show was when it took off. The first year wasn't that good. Because for me, television, I always say, I turned off television for a while, and I turn on television, I come home, and Oz is on.
Right.
And a guy is standing over another guy in a prison cell who's in a thing, and the guy's like got his all muscled up. He's like hanging on a steam pipe, and he says, you know what time it is now, don't you? It's time you best get on my body, or whatever he's like. And I'm sitting there going, whoa, like what happened to TV since I went away? It's like it got very, very real. You know what I mean? It got very, very harsh when all these shows came out. And so I started watching The Sopranos. Anyway, it becomes a big hit. And I'm sound asleep. And Mosier calls me, and I answer the phone. He literally goes, quick, who's the number one actor on TV? And I literally go, what? He goes, who's the number one actor on television? Who's the biggest star on television? I go, Michael J. Fox? And he goes, no, you idiot, it's Jimmy Gandolfini, because he just got nominated for an Emmy at that time, and the show was really taking off. And here was Jimmy, who had this small role in the play, and he went on to have this great, great career. However, and I'm going to almost wrap it up here with saying this, and that is, what I love about that show, and what worked so great about that show, is that no one can replace someone. It's not even about that. But when they looked for somebody who could create a character that could carry that show, you did such a fantastic job in that show. I loved watching you in that show. I'm so pissed off it ended. I can't wait. And so the question obviously is there a chance you might come back and you guys do another round, or you don't know?
Yeah, there's a chance.
There's a potential that you might do that.
There's a chance
that's fantastic.
That's right.
Now, the last thing I want to ask you, because we're going to run out of time, is you have such a deep, you're very soulful in the work you do. You're smart and you're aware. You're so many things inside of your acting. There are so many good things for people to be. And I'm wondering, what do you attribute that to? If you can say, are you into meditation? Are you, what do you, like, well, how do you feed yourself?
I like other people, you know, I mean, like, it's funny, you know, when you asked me to do this, I was thinking, there's only a couple people who've ever written me a note as an actor, and you're one of them. You're like one of the three. Yeah, you wrote me like a note after I did Quiz Show.
Right.
Yeah, and, you know, I like other people, and I think that's a good thing. I think that keeps you fresh and alive, and if you're interested in other people and working with other people, and I think you either you know curious about that or not, because you know sometimes 1 + 1 can equal 5. You know, it can be greater than the sum of its parts, and that's what interests me, is to have encounters with people. And so I don't know if I get that from my mom, my dad, but I don't take my opportunities lightly. I'm very thankful when I get a really good opportunity, and I still am. I mean, because I know how hard it is to, there's a part of you feel like, yeah, I'm good, when you're doing it. And then when it's over, you're like, well, did I really do that? Did I do okay? Or, whatever, it's like, and then it's kind of gone.
I feel like you're never done.
Yeah, it's right. You're still in the process of learning. And I think that's something that's good. An actor, we can improve, actually. We're not like done when we're 30.
I'm going to go do a movie with Rob Reiner. He's doing this movie about the Iraq War buildup. And I'll never forget, we're doing this movie I did with him, this Medgar Evers murder trial. And we did the Byron D. LeBeckwith murder case. And Jimmy Woods played D. LeBeckwith, and Whoopi Goldberg was Merle Evers. And I played this guy, Bobby DeLauder, who was the prosecutor in Jackson, Mississippi, who prosecuted the case years later. And I have this long courtroom speech, and when we're over, Rob, with his big, New York accent, says, I'm going to put the camera in the back of the courtroom and shoot it again, really wide, here. And shoot a big wide shot, I thought. And we had done the scene to a fairly well. We'd shot it like 15 different ways all day. And he goes, do you mind? Can you do it again for me a couple of times? Just run through the speech very wide. Do you mind? I go, no, I don't mind at all. I said, it's great. He goes, it's funny, isn't it? If you get a good part, you get a good speech, you get a good piece of material, you could do it all day. He goes, because this great secret about this business. I said, what's that? He goes, your next movie, you're going to shoot all day, you're going to have one line. Get down! Everybody get down!
That's hard to do, having one line in a movie. That's not easy to do. I think that's the hardest thing to do, It really is. Wow, you're right about that. That's how it is,
When's your movie going to come out?
I don't know. I'm just beginning to edit it right now. So.
And then what do you do? What do you do with the film? It's festivals, markets.
Well, sometimes you can sell it in advance.
You can.
There's people who want to see it, and we've shown a little teaser, and you go from
You've been
there.
down that road before, so you know what to do.
Believe me, I've been down that road. I have lugged.
You're cooking dinner for these people.
I've lugged film canisters around the country. You know what I mean? But that's okay. If there's something that you really love, that's all right. I've done it. So, but this case, I think will hopefully, make a nice sale of the film.
Well, we're looking forward to see it. Thank you very much for
Thank
doing
you
this
for
with
having
us.
me. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.